Hello, my name is Paul Gosling and I manage the Cereals and Oilseeds Recommended List for AHDB. Over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to be talking about some changes we've made to the recommended list for this year and also the new additions to the 2024-25 recommended list. First of all, the changes to the list. The changes we've made are in response to feedback we had during the oral review and also consultation we did with users at events over the summer. So if you contributed to the review or you spoke to us during the summer, thanks for your feedback, and hopefully the changes that you see will be the ones you wanted. The big change we've made is that data on the tables now runs down as a single table so that all the information on a variety can be seen on one page rather than spread over several tables. We've also moved the disease ratings and the agronomic information further up tables to give them greater prominence, because you told us that disease and agronomic information was the first things you looked at when you're looking for a new variety. When the booklet comes out in the new year, you'll see that we've added a lot of new information on the trialling system, the recommendation process, and the data. And that's because you asked us to understand more about the trialling system. And the aim of that is to make the information easier to understand, enable you to get more out of the RL by understanding the context of the data you see in the tables. Another change we've made is that we're no longer producing a summer edition. It's just a small print run that we used to add in the summer. It had some extra information in, but most of that information is now in the winter and the copy, so we will no longer be producing a summer edition. In terms of changes to layout in the spring barley tables, we've made quite a significant change this year. Previously, all the different varieties at all the malting varieties at different stages of the testing process were mixed together depending on yield. Now we've clearly separated out those MBC varieties which are approved, which have provisional approval, and those that are not yet approved by the MBC but are under test for malting. And that's to ensure that you're growing varieties that you know you'll have a market for at the end of the season. We've also added some changes to other ways of getting hold of the RL. You may already have the app on your phone. If you don't, it's a great app to have. Has all the recommended list information from the tables and the app. You don't have to have a phone signal to use it. It works without a phone signal. But something you asked us to do was to allow you to compare varieties side by side. We've added that feature now. You can compare up to 3 varieties side by side. And that change will have been rolled out to people who already have the app. If you don't have the app, as I suggest, you get it. It's a really good tool. We've also added a new tool to our website. That's an indexing tool which allows users to search for varieties. When you search on a variety by name, it will tell you the first and the last year that variety was recommended. This will help you find data in the archive for old varieties no longer listed, because during the review, some of you said you're still growing old varieties, but you find it difficult to find information on those varieties. This tool will help you do that. Looking at some more specific things to do with spring barley, we have made some slight changes to the rincosporium ratings this year. That's because recent dry years have resulted in very small data sets for calculating ratings. Some years we haven't been able to produce ratings at all. We've had to put the ratings in brackets based on limited data. We've had some better data this year with the wetter spring, but we've also adjusted the ratings slightly upwards to better reflect the level of disease in current varieties, so the ratings match more closely to those in winter barley. The effect is only modest, and it's mostly noticeable at the lower end, but you will see some varieties having higher ratings than you've seen before. Just to be completely clear, these changes do not reflect the change in the resistance of varieties, just a change in the way we calculate the ratings. So that's changes to the list. Now moving on to the new spring barley recommendations. So the highlights in brief, we have 3 new malting varieties under test for brewing only, 2 malting varieties under test for brewing and malt distilling, and 1 new malting variety under test for malt distilling only. And there are no new feed varieties added to the list this year. So these are the new varieties, malting potential. So at the top we have Bounty from Agravista. That's a brewing only variety, or a test for brewing only, but it has a UK recommendation. Nos Gambit from Sonova is also a brewing only variety with a UK recommendation. LG Aquarius is a third of these brewing only varieties from Lima Grain. It too has a UK recommendation. Nos Monroe is our malt distilling only variety. It's from Sonova and with a UK recommendation. And then we have the two varieties of dual use, which can be used for both brewing and malt distilling. We have Belter from Agri with a UK recommendation, and Olsen from Lima grain with a UK recommendation. But remember, these varieties are still under test for malting. They may still not be approved fully by the NBC, so make sure you have a market for these varieties before you commit to growing them. We've removed a number of varieties from the list this year: Cadiz, Malvern, Prospect, Florence, Sun King, and KWS Curtis. For the next few slides, you're going to see some tables. In the tables, we'll have the new varieties with their key attributes. I'll be comparing them to some older varieties on the list. In this case, we've got RGT Planet and Laureate, the two key varieties in this malting sector. Laureate dominant in the market, but RGT Planet also an important variety, particularly in the brewing side of things. So these are our three brewing-only varieties. Again, emphasising these are still under test for brewing. So starting with Bounty. Bounty's outstanding feature is its treated yield. With an east yield of 107, it's 10% ahead of Planet, 6% ahead of Laureate. The west yield is bracketed, which means it's limited data, but it's 105%. That's 3% ahead of Laureate and 9% ahead of Planet. The north yield is also 105%, 5% ahead of Laureate and 8% ahead of Planet. The mildew you'd expect from a spring barley, it's got a high mildew rating of 8. Brown rust is lower, it's a 4, but that's the same as Planet, and only just behind Laureate. It's got a Rincosporium score. It is bracketed, so that's limited data, but it's a 7, which is better than Planet and as good as Laureate. And those good disease resistance ratings means it's got a good untreated yield of 91%, 4% ahead of Planet, and just 1% behind Laureate, which has really been the class leader on untreated yield. Specific weight is a little low for Bounty at 65.7, a little bit behind Planet and Laureate, but not seriously bad. Lodging without PGR is a bracketed 8, so it's got good lodging resistance, although that is based on limited data, better than Planet and significantly better than Laureate. Brackling is good as an 8, it's resistant to brackling. It is a little bit later, Bounty, but at +2, it's certainly not a disaster. Moving on then to Nos Gambit, it's a little bit lower yielding than Bounty, but 104% in the east, still ahead of Laureate and well ahead of Planet. The west yield is bracketed like it was for Bounty, but it's 105%, so it matches Bounty, well ahead of Planet and Laureate. And the north yield's a little bit lower at 101%, just 1% ahead of Laureate. Mildew, again, at 8, as you'd expect. Brown rust is a little bit better, the 5, so that matches Laureate, and it's better than Planet. And the Rincosporium bracketed, so limited data, but it's a 6, same as Planet, not quite as high as Laureate. But despite that, it does have a very high untreated yield at 94%. That's higher even than Laureate. Specific weight is good, 67.5, ahead of Laureate, just behind Planet. So if you fail to get that malting specification, it's a good number for feed. And for lodging, again, it's a bracketed 8, so ahead of Planet and Laureate. Brackling is 9, so it's high as you can get, and it's a +1, the same as Laureate, not quite as early as Planet. LG Aquarius is a third of our brewing-only varieties. Its east yield is 105, so very good east yield, well ahead of Planet and Laureate. In the west, it's not quite as good as Bounty and Gambit at 102% bracketed. That's the same as Laureate, but ahead of Planet. In the north, it's 101%. It's 1% ahead of Laureate, but 4% ahead of Planet. Again, mildew's an 8. Brown rust again is a 4, same as Planet, just behind Laureate. Rincosporium a little bit low on the Rincosporium, a bracketed 5, so that is limited data, but it is below Planet and 2 places behind Laureate. Untreated yield, 91%, so just behind Laureate, but ahead of Planet. And it does have very good specific weight at 68.4, just behind Planet and well ahead of Laureate. So again, if it doesn't make malting specification, you have to sell into the feed market. That's a bonus. Lodging is an 8, bracketed, so it looks very good. And Brackling also an 8, it looks good. Again, it's a +1 and the ripening, so the same as Laureate. As well as tables, in this presentation, there are a number of slides with our variety comments. These variety comments appear on our website. It gives us a summary of the main features of the varieties. I'm not going to go through these variety comments, otherwise the presentation will end up being very long. You can pause the presentation, or of course you can go on our website and see them. So moving now to our malt distilling only variety. Again, this is a variety under test, so it's still not approved by the MBC. And here I'm comparing it to Laureate and Diablo. Diablo more of a malt distilling variety. In terms of yield, East yield for Monroe is just ahead of Laureate, 1% ahead at 102%, and 3% ahead of Diablo. The West yield is bracketed, so it's limited data, but it's just ahead of Laureate and 5% ahead of Diablo. The North yield, again, is good. It's ahead of Laureate and Diablo at 103%. Mildew, as you'd expect, is good as an 8. And brown rust is a 5, the same as Diablo and Laureate. Rincosporium is a little bit disappointing at a 5, so less than Laureate, less than Diablo, but it is bracketed, so it's limited data. But despite that, it has good untreated yield at 92%, so that matches Laureate, and is 4% ahead of Diablo. Specific weight is perhaps a little bit disappointing at 65.7, so it's behind Laureate and Diablo, but it's certainly not disastrous. And lodging, bracketed, so limited data, it's got a 7 at the moment. It's the same as Diablo, better than Laureate. Brackling is an 8, same as the two comparators. And it's a +2, but that is earlier than Diablo, and not quite as early as Laureate. Again, I'm not going to dwell on the variety comments. You can pause the video or look at them on the website. And then we move to our brewing and malt distilling varieties, again, under test still at this stage. I'm comparing them again to Diablo and Laureate, good examples of brewing malt distilling varieties. So Belter to start with, good yielding variety, 104% in the east, 3% ahead of Laureate, and 5% ahead of Diablo. In the west, it's 103%, so that's bracketed limited data, but ahead of Laureate and ahead of Diablo. And in the north, at 103%, it's well ahead of both Laureate and Diablo. Mildew, again, as you'd expect, is good. It's an 8. Brown rust is a 5. It's the same as the two comparators here. And Rincosporium, a bracketed 6, so limited data, but the same as Diablo, just behind Laureate. Untreated yield is 94%, so better than Laureate and well ahead of Diablo. And the specific weight at 67.7 is very similar to the comparators ahead of Laureate, so that's insurance if this has to be sold into the feed market. Lodging is a bracketed 7, so limited data, but matches Diablo and better than Laureate, and very resistant to brackling with a 9. It's a little bit later variety at +2. That's not as late as Diablo, but a little bit later than Laureate. And finally, Olsen, the last of the new varieties, the east yield of 103%, again ahead of Laureate and Diablo, 101% in the west, just a bit behind Laureate, but it is a bracketed figure, but it's ahead of Diablo. And at 102% in the north, it beats both the comparators here. Mildew is an 8. Brown rust a little bit disappointing, perhaps at a 4, behind both Diablo and Laureate. And the Rincosporium, a bracketed 6, matches Diablo, just behind Laureate. Good untreated yield, matching Laureate, and well ahead of Diablo. The specific weight a little bit behind at 66.8, again, certainly not a disaster. And it is apparently resistant to lodging with an 8, but that is limited data. But if it stays an 8, once we have some more data in, that will be ahead of Diablo and ahead of Laureate. Brackling is an 8, same as the comparators, so it's resistant to brackling. And at a +2, maturity is earlier than Diablo, not quite as early as Laureate. Again, we'll skip over the variety comments. You can pause and read those at your leisure. So to summarise spring barley, we have some new spring barley varieties under test for brewing with significantly improved yield and good agronomics. We have new spring barley under test for malt distilling, high yielding in all regions, and some spring barley varieties under test for brewing and malt distilling with high untreated and treated yields and good resistance to lodging and brackling. But again, remember these varieties are still under test. They're not yet approved by the MBC, so make sure you have a market for them before you commit to growing them. Finally, just to acknowledge the rest of the RL team, the data team who crunch all the numbers, and the field team who look after the trials, and also the people that help us put the RL together, BSPB, MAGB, and the UK flour millers. Thank you. And just remember, there are other crops covered in other videos. If you're interested in those, you can find them on the website. Thank you.